Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Kentucky Environmental Leadership Institute. I'm Ashley Wilms, Executive Director of Kentucky Resources Council. Our KELI program brings together science, law, and community voices to strengthen Kentucky's environmental leadership and help us all protect the health of our communities. We are honored today to host Dr. Rachel Keith, Associate Professor of Medicine at the University of Louisville and Director of Human Subject Services at U of L's Christina Lee Brown Enviro Institute. Dr. Keith is also a board-certified nurse practitioner. Her research explores how environment, things like air quality, neighborhood green spaces, and other exposures shapes cardiovascular health and overall well-being. She's helped lead projects such as the Louisville's Green Heart Project and Trager Microforest, which study and demonstrate the health benefits of urban trees and green spaces. As a quick reminder, this KELI session is being recorded. Please drop your questions in the chat as they come up, and we'll save those till the very end when we'll then open the floor for questions. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Rachel Keith.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to work on sharing my screen while I just say you have asked me to speak about my favorite topic. So I always appreciate the opportunity to talk to people about nature and health. So I am part of the Christina Lee Brown Enviro Institute. Hold on, let me get to where I can advance my slides. Give me 1 second. They are not advancing right now on the screen. You all don't see my slides advancing, do you? Let me see here. Oh, give me 1 second. I'm sorry. I will go ahead and get, so anyway, I'm part of the Environment Institute here at U of L, and I just want to be very transparent in the fact that we do great, fantastic work, but it is a we, not me. So this is an institute of multidisciplinary researchers that was started over 5 years ago. We are creating new models for collaboration between the Louisville Metro government, the University of Louisville, federal partnerships, philanthropic donors, corporations, and K through 12 schools. We're a group of over 200 very diverse and multidisciplinary researchers across all campuses and across multiple institutions. And without this wide breadth of expertise and knowledge, we wouldn't be able to conduct these types of projects because they are complex and multifaceted. That being said, part of why we do what we do is that we really believe and understand more and more now that the environment is intricately linked to health. And it's 85% of chronic disease could be the environment alone or the contribution of the environment to a genetic mismatch. So that means that your health is directly impacted by your environment. And one component of the environment, not all of the different components, but one of it is your built space and where you live and work and play. And so right now we know that most people are living in urban centers, and that by 2050, it's thought that 2.5 billion more people will be living in these types of urban centers than in more agriculture or more rural or suburban areas. And these environments in particular have a different kind of set of features that are very unique. And even though they may be more walkable in some areas, they have a significant lack of greenness. There's often food deserts. There's air pollution. A lot of people who work in offices have sedentary lifestyle. So all these things can impact your health. And what we do know is where you live matters for your health. So within where I live in Jefferson County, if you look at this dark green area to your right compared to the lighter green area to your left, there's a 12.5 year difference in life expectancy based on address. So if it's your address that's dictating your health more than some of these other factors, and your environment is playing a big role in that, what is it in the environment that may be either supporting or detrimental to your health? So if you look at the far right of your screen, we have a pixelation of tree distribution and a heat map of this Jefferson County area. And you can see the areas with the lowest life expectancy are the hottest and also have the lowest tree canopy. Also, if you think about the social environment in this urban area, on the red areas here are the areas that historically were redlined and have some infrastructure and socio-demographic factors that still linger due to that redlining policy of long ago. You can also see that where we have the most toxic chemical release is similar to the areas where we had the worst health outcomes. We also have air pollution levels showing that in the central and left side of Jefferson County, we have the highest air pollution levels and also lead. So we're starting to really look at, we don't have that many trees. We have chemical exposures. We have heat. And so how has this affected health? So when you think about health and you want to think about the totality of health, some of it's impacted by health literacy. So if you look at reading score exams, even things as basic as reading are lower on the left side of Jefferson County compared to the right. This is an asthma risk map that's being created. Your risk of asthma is higher in these areas where the environments aren't as healthy as we think they could be, and similar with cancer. So what does that mean? So we have all these different exposures going on now. We may have air pollution, we may have lead, we may have socioeconomic impacts that are lingering from the historic redlining districts. We may have reading scores impacting income or education levels. So when you start to build this bigger picture of environmental co-exposures, there's really becoming a bigger breadth of literature to suggest that, we need to look at things cumulatively, because starting in utero to older age, things add up. And the more stressors you have, the larger the stress response. So we can look at air pollution, but that only gives us one piece of the picture. And a lot of people, based on their environment, may have more than one exposure that could be causing their body stress. So what does that mean to these people who are experiencing extreme stress, a lot of different types of exposure? Typically, we think of these as sources of inflammation, oxidative stress, different physiologic and biochemical processes in the body, and they can lead to what we call epigenetic changes. So this is changes made to parts of your hereditable not genes, so your DNA doesn't actually change, but there's things associated with that DNA called methylation, sulfonylation, histone modifications that you can pass on. So this isn't what you're born with, but it's what happens with your exposure to environment, and you can pass it on to your offspring. So we really want to think about the fact that these environments aren't impacting only one person, they're also impacting future generations to come. So one of the things that we continue to get in Louisville is an F for air particle pollution. I think we improved for a little bit, and then last year we received an F again. In part, that might be because we've had some of the wildfire particulate matter blowing into the region. That's kind of decreased some of the readings that we were making improvements on in the city. We're also losing a lot of trees, and that can be due to development or pest. If you've heard of the ash borer disease, that has come through the area, and that leads to an almost complete wipeout of the ash tree. And then we also have what I mentioned is that multidisciplinary team of experts in the community who can really think about these things in a way that's impactful. So one of the things we first started with was airborne pollution. So these are particulate matter, which is like the more solid components that are in air pollution. And as you can see, there's different sizes of air pollution, some being ultrafine, which we think get into your body and distribute systemically at most because they're so tiny, up to PM10. So these, you can't see them, you may not even smell them, but they're in the air and you're breathing them in different environments. And there's microclimates of them within the city. There's also a gaseous component to air pollution called volatile organic compounds that we're really interested in. And this gaseous component, when you breathe it in, can have systemic effects too. And the combination of these, even at chronic low levels, can lead to chronic disease, likely through inflammation. So what we also know is that air pollution increases through that long-term inflammation. One of the chronic diseases it impacts most is cardiovascular disease. So this is research out of our group just showing that how close you live to a roadway impacts one of the markers of cardiovascular health significantly. And so people who live closer to the major roadways could be at an increased risk for cardiovascular disease. In particular, we know that it can affect your blood vessels themselves, and that those blood vessels have to be really healthy and stretchy and compliant in order for your heart to stay healthy. And that we think it's maybe not only the particle matters, but that gaseous component, which is the volatiles, that are increasing to some of these levels of oxidative stress and inflammation that can cause these blood vessels either constrict and or become harder over time, either through changes to the cells that make up these blood vessels or what's deposited in them. Air pollution more recently has been linked to changes in cognition. So it's seen in kids, who are closer to roadways in school can have a reduced cognitive performance. And there's new reviews suggesting links to autism and Alzheimer's disease. Urban environments themselves, because this is here in Louisville, this is the area that we work in most often, can contribute to stress. So when people have done surveys of people in urban space, they've found that there's a 20% higher risk of anxiety. There's a 40% higher risk of mood disorders. It can lead to higher blood pressure and heart rate. It can lead to social isolation, which seems a little counterintuitive when you think of how many people may be in this space. There's also a huge impact of heat islands, and I don't know if anyone's heard people talking about Louisville. You know, we have had a heat island issue for quite a while. It weakens the immune system, and there are these ACEs, which are kind of early childhood stresses that can lead to long-term impacts. So these urban environments are unique in a way that suburban and rural environments aren't. When you think about an urban environment, think about the lights and the noise you get. So this is the path of flights coming into Louisville. And so the areas that are yellow and red have more noise. The areas with blue are a little more spaced out. So things like light and noise can impact health. In particular, noise can induce hearing loss, which is probably not happening necessarily at the air flight traffic control related noise, but other noises in urban environments can. It can increase blood pressure, can increase ischemic heart disease and stroke. And this is likely all linked to these stress hormones that your body produces in response to that. And so those stress hormones contribute to chronic disease. So not only these heart disease factors, but diabetes. It can also disturb sleep. And if anyone's paid attention to social media, regular media, any sort of health information that's coming out is we know more and more about how sleep disturbances impact overall health. In pediatric populations, there's learning delays. It can contribute to ADD, low birth weights, and there's also a risk of mental health issues. So I don't want to pile on and just continue with the fact that urban environments have all these challenges that people have identified. I want to start thinking about how we approach those challenges, and are there ways that if the environment is making us not as healthy, can we take the environment and create instead a built-scape that does make us healthy? So, can we flip the script? Can we change the paradigm on what the environment's doing to us to support us being our best selves? So one of the things that we have been working, one of the spaces we've been working in that I'm most excited about, is this idea of greenness and health. So there's a practice out of it started in Japan, but it's East Asian practice called Shinrin Yoko that is called forest bathing. We also have forest therapists that have kind of come over into the European and American space, where this is people who go and immerse themselves in forests. So they go and they do a meditative practice and they're in the forest, and there's been significant health benefits shown for that. They also have healing gardens in Korea for cancer that have shown really great benefits, but people don't necessarily know why. There's a couple hypotheses and theories, and one of them has to do with this idea that this more urban area is where we for millennia have lived, or this more suburban rural area with the greenness and the trees, and we co-evolved with plants and animals and being exposed to all these things. And then when we move to this sort of environment, we come into this environmental genetic mismatch of what our body is used to. So it creates stress because the visual escapes. One of the ideas is something called attention restoration theory, and it has to do with pixelation and what your eyeballs see. And when you look at these visual scapes in nature, your body takes a break, and it can reset its homeostasis or reset its base levels and give your brain a break, and helps reduce that chronic stress. But when you see these sort of visual scapes, the pixelation of the built environment actually induces low-level stress in the background without you ever knowing it. There's also this idea, but the biophilia hypothesis, that people are drawn to nature and animals. It was started by Edward O. Wilson in 1984. And so it was used to explain why people are really excited about protecting spaces like parks and green space, and that it's important, and this helps sustain life. So building on those, people have started to look at the benefits of urban greenness. So there's benefits to the environment. It can decrease air pollution, light pollution, noise pollution. Those visual scapes and the aesthetics can increase. There's also things that it does to the people who are interacting with it. So if pollutions go down, all sources of pollution, your exposure goes down. You may be more, if there's parks and the areas are more walkable, you might get more physical activity. It can also increase the quality of your sleep. If your immune system's healthier, it allows you to be healthier overall, because that immune system plays a role in stress and viruses and health in general. And it can bring communities together. So overall, when you then look at very specific disease risk factors, things like blood pressure improve, cholesterol, insulin resistance, diabetes, and obesity. But a lot of this work has been done with epidemiological studies. So that means these are large cohorts of people who participated in a health study, typically around a certain disease. And they collected a lot of information on them. And these data sets are being remined or reanalyzed for things like greenness. So the studies themselves aren't what we consider gold standard for clinical practice. because they are not these kind of randomized clinical trials that were designed just to test an intervention for trees. So we wanted to start to think about how we would do that. And this is one of our pilot projects called Green for Good. We did this particular project with St. Margaret Mary, which is on Shelbyville Road. It was a school that was very, their students and staff were very giving in allowing us to put a vegetated buffer out front in half of their school. So as you can see up here, the school sits in the back, Shelbyville Road's in the very front, and they have this really nice green space between their school and the road. So half of it was planted with this staggered vegetative buffer to see, can we change levels of air pollution with vegetation? And then the students and the staff both underwent some physical testing. So this is what the buffer ended up looking like in the end. We had all this analysis of ultrafine particles, ozone, particulate matter, all the gaseous components to look at in front and behind the trees and see what happened. And then we also collected blood and urine from children and adults. And we were able to show that the biofilters reduced the risk of heart disease and chronic inflammatory biomarkers. So we think this could lead to a protection against things like asthma and diabetes. And this may be because those ultrafine particles behind that biofilter were lower. So this allowed us to move on to Green Heart Louisville, which is a large, it's been going on for 7 years now, I think. It's a large community study. We have one of our community members here with us today, actually, listening to the presentation. But we started many years ago. We first began community engagement to identify an area that had the environmental characteristics we were looking for. So we had to have a certain population density. We wanted a certain amount of roadway frontage that we could plant and also that would contribute to this pollution. So we could figure out if our interventions were mitigating exposure. We also wanted a community that was interested and willing to collaborate and partner with our group on this project. We were going to put in environmental monitors and ask people to be part of the study and plant trees. So it took a lot of work and a lot of partnerships and a lot of time of people to socialize the idea before we picked our area. Our area is in, you'll see a map of it shortly, but it spans from a little south of Belknap campus to south of 264 going towards Iroquois Park, but it does not go as far as Iroquois Park. It's about Ashland Boulevard is the end of that. It goes as far west as 7th Street and as far east as the airport. So what we needed to do was understand the trees in the area. We were able to fly LiDAR over the area and get speciation and health of the trees so that we could see, are there trees that we need to help save from ash borer? Where do we have space to plant? And do we expect there to be a significant amount of loss during the study period? We also did a environmental assessment of the air quality. So there was a grad student out of Washington University that drove a golf cart and or a Prius around all these neighborhoods with a portable mass spec in the back to look at things like ultrafine particles, VOCs, and all these different individual components of air. We also built one of the most extensive stationary monitoring systems too, where people would go out and put passive air monitors that were collected on and off. There's a group looking at biodiversity. So they went out and looked at the birds, bats, and bees in the area. And we'll watch these over time to see how after an intervention, how do these change? Do they affect human health? Do they not? We also worked with Hyphae Design Studio and some individuals out of Berkeley to do some modeling. So different configurations of trees may lead to different potential to buffer and or change air quality. So if you have trees that are all kind of lollipop trees along a roadway, could that trap air pollution down closer to where people are breathing because there's a big open space there and then a big fluffy top? If you have a straight wall of trees, would that be more like a sound wall? Could air pollution come up and over? Or if you build this staggered height and depth, does that help the air pollution get in and start to get trapped and actually get a filtration effect? So we went through all these steps to start. We also needed to know people's perception of greenness. If you remember some of the hypotheses that I discussed early on, some of the benefits of greenness are contributed to mental health, potentially through this aesthetic process. So we have to know, are we doing things that people view as green? What is it that people think is green? Do they expect a park to go in? Do they expect trees down the roadway? What is it that people think of greenness? And when we put greenness in, what are people looking for? If it's highly curated versus this more naturalistic, if we put it on a naturalistic thing for maintenance and for soil health, maybe that's better, but people may be afraid of what's growing or living in there, so it could induce stress. So we have to look at all these components of the project. And then we also did very extensive clinical phenotyping, and that's the part I'm in charge of, is the clinical components. So we look non-invasively at people's insides, looking at how healthy their blood vessels are with ultrasounding. We look at their lung functions. We take blood, hair, toenails, cheek swabs to look at their microbiome health, to look at early indicators of stress and disease. We take hair to see how people's stress and exposure to things are. We take toenails for metals. So we're able to get a really complete picture of people, what we call subclinical health. We also do about 2 hours worth of interviewing to find out things about physical activity, what you eat, where do you spend your time, inside or outside, what sort of occupation do you have? So these are all things we have to understand as we start to statistically build models around being able to say the trees are or are not doing this. So this is the map of our intervention area. The outside donut we left alone, that's considered our control because this is considered a clinical trial. And the inside area, we put trees. We put a little over 6,000 trees, mature large trees. And we also put in shrubs and grasses and different things like that. We used a variation of species as well because we wanted to increase the biodiversity. There is evidence to suggest that increased biodiversity in the organisms help contribute to those health factors. So this is an example of residential greening. If you look at where the circle is, all those large pine trees, to give you kind of an idea of scale, were put in by our group, and they were able to nicely fill up on the side road next to their house and their backyard. This is a picture of the roadway buffer that's on 264. So instead of having the typical sparse tree here and there, we were able to put in this nice dense vegetative filtration on the front side of the sound wall. We did use mainly evergreens for very specific properties that they have. So that's why you see so many different evergreens. So we've been able to show some clinical results from this. We know that we've been able to see that the chemicals, the actual chemicals in the air pollution, are damaging your blood vessels, which does increase your risk for heart disease. They also cause some early signs of liver damage or liver damage, which can increase your risk for liver disease. We also have shown that these volatiles are associated with higher blood pressure. We did a sleep study as part of a sub-study that showed the cleaner the air is in where you're sleeping, the better your sleep quality. we've shown that green space, like in general, if you have more green space, we can show that you have less of these pollution chemicals that you're exposed to. We also show that it's brought down your risk for heart disease. It helps with mental health, and that people really view greenness differently than academics are reporting it. So we need to be cognizant of that. And our most significant finding was announced by our director, Aruni Bhatnagar, last summer, I believe, and it was that inflammation measured by a biomarker in the blood decreased by 13 to 20% in people who lived where the trees were planted. And this will lead to a significant risk reduction of chronic disease. So what that means is when we looked at people before and after planting, only the people that lived in the area that we had trees. It doesn't mean they had to have trees on their yard, doesn't mean they have to be directly next to the trees, but anyone who lived in that area that we defined as the center part that was treated had a reduction in this really significant marker for health, which we are really excited about. So we have other green studies going on at the moment that I'd like to highlight too, through a very significant philanthropic donation to the university from the Christina Lee Brown family. We are part of this new vision of health that they are building down on 5th and Muhammad Ali. So as part of that, right next door, there was a park that is on the west side of the building that the city was interested in understanding, is this a space that we could study for greenness also? So instead of being a whole neighborhood, could this small park be used to help revitalize people's health and revitalize downtown? So with donations from the Trager Family Foundation, we've started a project down there looking at putting individuals in this green space, and they sit for 20 minutes and then they walk around the park for 20 minutes. And then this is the area surrounding, just to give you an idea of the other area around the building. So we put them in an adjacent urban space that they would see buildings and space that they would normally have. And we're taking some very similar environmental measures. We look at wet bulb temperature, we look at humidity, solar radiation, air pollution in the area. So we have stationary monitors and we have monitors that are portable that move with us. We hook people up in particular to look at stress biomarkers. So we put ECGs, which measures how their heart rate and how their heartbeats change, which is it's called heart rate variability. It's a very sensitive indicator of stress. We take saliva to measure stress hormones. We take blood pressure. We take temperature. We take a bunch of different what we call physiological or body readings and exposure readings to understand how this space is changing people's exposure and stress levels. And then this is a mock-up of what we planned on doing for the park. It is built out. I should probably update this picture soon to show what the park is built out. So that park was planted with this central thick, dense planting of trees in phase 1, and then phase 2 will fill in from where some of the old trees were on the outer edge. And we have put people there now. We're putting them back in these spaces again this summer to see how this forest space in the downtown area mitigate stress. And some preliminary data suggests that the park itself could have some pretty significant effects on stress. And even for that short 20-minute period. And part of it could be this heat island effect that this park is potentially going to buffer. You can see there's large differences in temperatures based on where you are in the urban environment. We're also doing similar biodiversity of the soil, because being exposed to soil and the microorganisms in that can help train the immune system. It can bring down inflammation. We're looking at the birds, bats, and bees. I can just tell you anecdotally, because this is not the actual data coming from the avian researchers, that I hear a very different level of birdsong than I did when I was in this space helping with the studies prior to the plantings. So all this information helps us provide scientific evidence for really strong constructive ways to implement environmental change to help with health. So again, really creating tools to help the environment and the people in those environments to be healthy, and that those health and those changes hopefully be sustainable. We've also done garden studies where we've taken people to very curated gardens, a botanical type garden, and measured their stress responses there. It is probably this is unpublished data, and so we're hoping to get it out soon, but it is probably one of the more significant self-reported stress reductions I've seen in any of the interventions we do. And this potentially has to do in part with this idea of there's a sense of control of nature with the way botanical gardens are built. So there's some really interesting work going around that. We're also looking at rumination. So rumination is when your brain gets stuck in kind of a cycle of getting fixated on something. And we're working with some researchers to look at rumination and how rumination plays into factors. So if your brain gets a break because one of the participants in this garden study said, "Oh, I thought I was going to go and plan," they were a business owner, "plan out the next week of our business." And they said, "Instead, I watched a dragonfly for 2 hours, and I didn't even realize 2 hours had went by." So if your brain gets this break, and it can come back and it can reduce your stress hormones and reduce and help with this mental health component, your whole body benefits in the end. So not only do the trees buffer pollution, we
Yes.
think they do something really amazing and fantastic. We think they emit chemicals too, that when you use the word chemicals, I try and use compounds. It can sound scary, but we think that when people interact with these, similar to the way they would interact with one of these air pollution volatiles, they breathe them in and they do systemic things. But instead of being bad, we think these are actually good for people. So some of these can reduce inflammation, can reduce oxidant stress, can be stress relievers. They can attenuate blood pressure. They can do some amazing things to your body. So not only are we maybe buffering air pollution, but could we also be exposing people? Or if you put yourself in these smaller parks or gardens, are you breathing in things that have systemic effects and can last for a while? So we've created some methodology to actually look at greenness exposure and these particular markers to say, in a really scientific, rigorous way, are there certain compounds that are better than others for these protective effects? Is there dosing? Are there thresholds that are good? You know, can you get too much of these things? So again, people could say, "Oh, trees are great. Why do you need to study it?" Well, we need to study it so that we can put the correct trees in, so we can expose people to the correct biologics if you have a particular intervention, so that we can create modeling that buffers air pollution if that's the goal. So I have an exposure chamber here at our group, and what I've been able to show is that when people breathe these things in, their heart rate variability decreases, which it actually means people are healthier. So you need to have a lot of variability in how your heart beats to stay healthy. Your heart rate decreases, and then these markers of your immune function change, and they change in a way that's really healthy for you. So even in exposure to individual biologics is having, and low levels of those is having really significant impacts on people. We've also done some preliminary sleep studies to put these biologics in people's home, and we do objective and subjective readings of their sleep outcomes. Again, we look at stress and different parameters around this, and early pilot data suggests that these could modulate sleep in a really beneficial way. We have another study that looks at all of Louisville. I know a lot of people ask questions about, are you doing anything outside of Greenheart area? We do have a similar study of about 200 people that transcends all of Jefferson County. So we're able to look at similar things and compare things, even though we don't have the tree intervention, to understand in a larger geographic area how environment contributes to health. Lastly, I mentioned it at the beginning. I want to mention it now. I could not do any of this without a huge group of people. As you can hear, these projects are really multifaceted, very complex, very multidimensional. So without the support of people listed here and others, there's no way that we would be able to do this kind of work. So when I get to come talk, I'm just the lucky face you happen to see. But no, there's a large team behind all this. So what I want to finish with is just that, I think sometimes we get stuck in this cycle of hearing, all the things that all the challenges we have in the environment. Heat is rising, pollution's out there, there's all these things. So I really want people to think about how they can flip the narrative, and what can you do to flip the narrative to say, okay, so if the environment is really that impactful, how do we use it in a new, novel way? And how do we do it in a way that's not going to, you know, that's really evidence-based? Because what we don't want to see is people just putting in trees and then be like, oh, it doesn't work, right? So our mission is to really do this in a scientific, rigorous way that we can come up with nature-based solutions and interventions for health. So with that, I am happy to go. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see the chat, and then see if there's any questions. Okay, so the first one is, what were the roadway distances evaluated? So you didn't know that was a trick question, but it is, because we have looked at different buffers. And that's one of the hard things about greenness or airway pollution. People kind of pick different buffers. So we've looked at 2, 500, and 2 and 500. 2 and 500 meters, and then also a kilometer, 1,000 meters. So, we do tend to see, based on what the parameter is, whether it's greenness, whether it's air pollution, whether it's particulate versus gaseous, you do need to look at a couple different buffer ranges, because each one kind of has its own unique modeling that needs to be done to think about why we think those parameters are affecting health, or how they disperse in air and things like that. So I can tell you for greenness, most of our findings are in that 200 to 500 meter buffer. And then, yep. So, all right. So participants could receive slides and list of references. We can definitely think about that. We try and give back to the participants as much as we can. So yeah, that's great. You have a group of students with you. They would like to know how to get involved, in particular within their own schools. So that's great. And, I'm always happy to also have a conversation offline. One of my easiest go-tos for schools in general, whether it's with us or without someone else, is thinking about, in particular, pollution and greenness, right? So can we advocate for no idle zones? I'm a mom of 3 kids. I get it. When it's freezing cold outside or the sun's beating in, it might be a little hard if you're going to be there for 5 or 10 minutes to want to turn the car off. But really, no idle zones are something that can significantly impact air pollution. Also, could you do a campaign or kind of a grounds root thing to say, hey, we want to put some trees in? And you could reach out to researchers that are like us, that are doing things, to say, is there a way, is there a space, can you give us any information on what would be the most impactful trees, or what trees could we put in? And even just adding some to the playgrounds. We've done that to a couple of the schools in the area. adding some either near a roadway or on the playground for people to interact with. It's really kind of fun to see kids, drawn to that vegetation. But if you'd like to reach out offline, we can always see if there's any other ideas we can come up with. What species do we plant in the filtration buffers? So I mentioned I am the clinical lead. So if you want individual species names, again, you can reach out. We have a list of those. What I can tell you is most of the species we planted were evergreens. And that's in particular because they will keep their leaf year round, meaning we don't have a seasonal effect per se of a de-leafed period. Also, they have a larger leaf area index. So the leaf area index is the amount of leaf biomaterial on that tree. So the way that evergreens and in particular pines, having that long conical pointy leaf structure and just tons and tons of them, it actually gives a lot of nice leaf area index to help trap. And there's also a wax coating on it that helps with that trapping of air filtration. So if you want the exact, list, you would have to reach out and, we could see in particular, but I am not the person who off the top of my head knows the exact names of those species. Recommended readings on this topic. So there's a lot of good books out there. If you want a little science, a little non-science, I shouldn't say non-scientists. There's one called Braiding Sweetgrass I really like for people. It's by a biologist. So there's enough science that it's legit, but she's from an indigenous community, and so she has a very unique storytelling narrative that goes along with that. I can even sometimes get my kids to listen to it some on audiobook. So that's a really good one. You got me in a period that I'm deeply immersed in academic literature because of grants. So right now my brain is a little fried but I'm happy to pass one on to the council once I can actually think a little bit more about some of those titles that are specific to trees. I'm on a small town urban forestry commission. Okay, that would be great. Yeah, we love people knowing about this. And the more people that are exposed or think about these things, I think it's great. Any other questions? All right.
Well, Dr. Keith, thank you so much for everything you've shared today. It was so informative, and we appreciated you being here. So,
Yay!
I'd also like to mention that today's session of KELI will be available on our website soon, and you can also follow us on social media. We usually post and let you know when that's available. I'd also like to mention that today's KELI session is made possible by the support of people like you. So if you value these opportunities to learn and engage, please consider supporting Kentucky Resources Council, or just share with your friends about these opportunities. We always appreciate a shout out on, like I said, on social media as well. So thank you so much again for joining us today and being with Dr. Keith and learning more about this important topic.